All right, we are live. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Baron. This is your Brain on Books, and today we're talking about Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Obviously, a book Jimmy and I are both pretty high on. So, real quick, I want to introduce Jimmy. For those who don't know, he's actually the first subscriber on the channel, and this being the first stream on the channel, it's quite fitting to have him on here. So, if you're not familiar with him, which I assume most of you watching already are, please check out the Fantasy Network. Jimmy, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, I mean, like Baron said, it was a wonderful intro, and I was happy to be your first subscriber, man. Yeah, I'm Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Network. I review a lot of science fiction and fantasy, but I also do delve into literary fiction at times. And I think Cormac McCarthy is honestly probably my favorite, like non-fantasy horror sci-fi author, and could end up being like one of my favorite authors of all time because I've read a couple of things from him now that I really, really enjoyed. But The Road is just a masterpiece, man. And I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to get into the spoilers and all the impactful scenes here, but just real quick, we'll give our general impressions. I know you kind of briefly touched on that already. I think this was your first McCarthy book you read, right?
Yes, this was the first one I read, and the reason why I was so eager to get to this one is one, everyone says Blood Meridian's like really rough, like it's a love or hate, right? And The Road is one of my favorite movies. I saw it back in the day in theaters, and I think I've watched it probably two times since. Which for me, I do not rewatch stuff. Not a big rewatcher. So the fact that I've watched this more than once shows how much I love it. Probably in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. So I was pumped to read the book.
Yeah, I think you picked a good starting place. I personally started with Blood Meridian, which I think was probably a huge mistake because it really, I don't know, it kind of, I think, put my expectation in the wrong place for The Road, and it really delayed me picking it up in the first place. I mean, we know McCarthy's writing style is a big shock if you haven't read like postmodern lit at all.
Oh, yeah.
And The Road's much more digestible, but I also heard a lot of things related to the book that it was just, so bleak and horrific. And I heard some people say this was like the scariest book they read. So when I went into this, I had some really out there expectations and was just pleasantly surprised that although this book is bleak, it's also about altruism and love and compassion. And in my opinion, probably one of the best stories as far as a father and son together. So this was a pleasant surprise. So I just mentioned Cormac McCarthy's writing style, which I know is difficult for a lot of people to get into. If you're not familiar, obviously he doesn't use much punctuation. The format is pretty unique. So, Jimmy, was that difficult for you adjusting to, or did it feel pretty natural?
Well, he's not one to be bound by rules. That's for damn sure. That was awesome from the get go. So I have an interesting experience with this book. In fact, that I actually started it in paper, and then we were going on a long road trip. So me and my wife decided to listen to it in the car. It was like the perfect length, right? At like a 1.5x speed. So I read the first 20% of the book on paper, and then re-listened to that first 20% in the car, and it is amazing. The difference between the two. And I think it speaks to how open this book is for tone and just interpretation in general, but even the writing and the way that the lack of punctuation accentuates some of the dialogue is really, really, really interesting. There was actually humor in this book that I didn't catch whenever I was reading it plainly, like just trying to keep worry that the audiobook narrator to life and gave a totally different feel to the book. It almost felt a little bit more positive. And I'd be curious to see if there's a difference between an audiobook listen to this to physical, if one of them find it to be more than the other, because I do think that the book, obviously at times it's horrendously dark, but there's also a lot of times where the narrator adds just a little bit of, as my dad would say, pizzazz, and makes it come to life in a different way. So that was a really interesting experience. I personally don't have any issues with Cormac McCarthy's writing style. In fact, I think it's amazing. And one of the things that really stood out to me in the writing is the fact that we don't really have names for our two main characters. It's fascinating. And that does two things. So one, in a scoped way, it makes you put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
It's not tied to a person or entity and a step in the shoes. Now, obviously, if you're not male or you're not a young boy, maybe you can't do that. I can understand that there being a little bit of a block there. But the other thing it does it showed that Cormac McCarthy is so good that he doesn't have to have names for his characters. You know who's speaking whenever it's on the page. And that is, I think, one of the biggest you could pay to an author.
Yeah, no, he's very sparse in both his writing style and then how he assigns things. So I think even the setup for the book itself, since we're dealing with this disaster, I mean, we don't get any information. We can make some assumptions on what occurred, but does it really matter at all for the story? I mean, I don't know.
It's a good question. And are there another papa and another boy facing the exact same circumstances 100 miles away? Probably.
Very well could be. I mean, this small slice of struggle between these two characters is all you need to really drive home what I think he's trying to do with the story.
Very intimate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, touch on the writing style, kind of just how we feel about this book. So, I kind of want to get into some particular scenes that stand out. And the big thing that I've kind of struggled with this book is it purely bleak and dark, or is there a lot of beauty here? And I think there's certain scenes that kind of pull me in both directions. The first one being the mother. So the mother takes her life here, which is a dark, very impactful moment. So I just want to briefly touch on what's your opinion, how that affected you reading it, because this was really hit home for me, especially as somebody who has children, who's married, who, you know, is used to that nuclear family. That was just heart-wrenching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care. I need you. I don't care. I mean, facing your reality. I think there's a few moments in everyone's where we take, and sometimes it's random, but you'll have a moment where it dawns on you that this isn't forever. And in those moments, we think we should do more. And I felt like this is like the examination of that, like facing reality and saying none of this matters. I would rather die than be here with you, the man I love, and our child. And I regret bringing this child. I mean, that is as heavy as it gets. Like that is so, it's so intense. I absolutely loved it because that would be me in that situation. I'd be like, I'm out.
You're not up for the dark world and cannibalism and everything else.
I'm good. I didn't sign up for that.
Yeah. And one thing we were talking about is writing style. One thing I've noticed is those dark moments is McCarthy has a way of writing where it's just a matter of fact. And I've seen that not just in The Road, but other writing where even his dialogue will just be one word. And I think his restraint there really adds to the punch of the scene. Because you get in her head slightly just from these glimpses of what she's going through and you understand the world, but there's not a lot of context behind it. And just that it's just boom, here we go. She gave up. Man, that's intense. So obviously we're starting the story somewhat in that position to where you just think this is going to be a nightmare the whole way through before we even kind of get to some of the heartwarming moments.
Yeah. And it really is a matter of fact, and it has to be because there's no doom scrolling. There's no, oh, I wonder what, the people in charge are going to do to help. There's none of that. It's actually over. And I think it's as we all face that, like eventually you die and you face that moment. And I think that she is eager to face it. And that is one response that's super valid. And obviously we know that Papa doesn't feel that way. He wants to keep it going. He wants to keep the fire burning. I think it's very realistic to think that there'd be two camps and she'd fall into one. And it's horrendously tragic, but I can say I relate. Like, I think I would fall probably more into her camp.
Interesting.
I'm a quitter. What can I say?
So obviously is after we have that devastating moment, they start their journey. And for me personally, there's a few moments that just stand out as far as this father really trying to do everything possible to give his son some form of happiness and some form of, normalcy, if you will, in this super bleak existence. The first one, and I know this might sound kind of overly simple, is when he gets the Coke for him. And when he's unwilling to take any for himself, and he just gives it to him, that small slice of happiness, I think sets up kind of multiple examples that we see going forward through the rest of the story.
Yeah. Never Coca-Cola meant so much.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it was.
even if you think about it, even the pop and the fizz when he cracks it open
Mm-hmm.
is a sound that is not heard every day millions of times, as it is right now. In this world, that pop and the fizz is everything. It's actually completely opposite of the silence that I felt when I read the book. And it's almost like a moment of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he wrote that scene was just really tremendous. And then like the sensory details
Yeah.
of the boy describing it, and you're just like, wow. It's weird, but that can of diabetes is a bright spot.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the sensory details, which I've seen not only in this book but other McCarthy, which there's a detachment to the way he writes, but I think he uses those select points of sensory details to really pull you in. I kind of reminds me of like Stephen King does that a lot. I know you've read 11/22/63, and we've talked about that root beer and the start of the story that just pulls you into that scene, and it's so critical, even though it's so simple.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned King because I got a lot of King vibes whenever I was reading this. Like when I read, and there's a certain harshness to some of the sentences and things that King also does, and I relate those two for some reason, and also this that they write the dark and gloomy. Gloomy. I thought of 11/22/63 as well. He pops the Coke. I thought of the root beer with the paddle. I made that same exact connection.
Okay. So, kind of moving forward, the other kind of example of giving something to a son is, they find the bunker, they're on the run,
Oh,
all the food and just the happiness in that kind of small moment to where they get to spend together. I know some more so in the film than in the book is, just them sitting down for dinner and finally getting cleaned up and the father shaving. And,
yeah.
they just had that small moment, even for a short period of time, to just any form of normalcy, and just how desperate he was to find that for himself.
Yeah, and it is you can feel the relief. Like it's so strong and so tense the whole book. When they find I mean, I was like gasping, like thank oh my gosh, because you're watching this kid skinnier and skinnier, and the dad is losing hope a little bit when they
Mhm.
find the bunker. And in the world that this is written in, obviously our world, but a much more post-apocalyptic version, it doesn't feel like this kind of thing can happen. And some would say that is very contrived and inconvenience and all these things, but I never felt that with this. It felt like a miracle as I read it, like a real miracle. And especially in the world as it is in this story, you just don't see that. And it's a beautiful moment. And getting pseudo cleaned up and stuff. It's like whenever you can't breathe through your nose, and it's like I miss being able to breathe through my nose. Like imagine not being able to shave for 6 months. You know what I mean? Like think about how good it would feel once you have it all off and you just kind of feel. If I go a couple weeks and I feel my face and it's nice and smoother. Like that's a feeling you can relate to. And Cormac McCarthy did this on purpose.
Mhm.
Things that we take for granted every day, or whenever they bathe in the waterfall, right? And they talk about I'm starting to stink and stuff like that. There's something about being clean. You feel like there's another day, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up a good point as far as it being a relief and him building the tension before then. I know when they're sitting at one point and the boy asks him, what happens if we're starving? And the father says, we are starving.
Shit. Oh, it's rough.
Yep. So I guess kind of to back up earlier in the book, for me, probably the most brutal scene in the whole story, even worse than the mother, is when the father's trying to teach the son what he has to do to commit suicide if necessary.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably one of the darkest things I've read in fiction, period.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that make that heavy is that is someone's reality today, some world. Like we sit in America and we have, there's obviously terrible things that happen every day, but that situation has played out in the real world before. And I thought about that whenever that scene happened, because you think, oh man, that's such a tragedy. Like, how could it ever get to that point? Around the world daily, there's maybe not to that exact moment, right, in those exact details. But if these people come and the bad people come, like, you have to be able to take care of business. Are you going to be able to do it? And thinking about a child having to be in that mindset to make that decision, that's the greatest tragedy of all. That there's nothing worse. And it feels especially relatable, right now. So when children are dying, or children are having to choose to die rather than to live, that is a pretty good landmark for how bad things have gotten. And I agree with you. I think that's the darkest part in the book. I think it's way more bleak than the mother committing suicide, because I can rationally understand why she did it. I refuse to rationalize a child having to make that decision.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't do it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it somewhat makes sense as far as matching with the desperation of the world. He wants to protect his son from, harm that is worse than him just starving to death. It really comes down to someone else eating him, which makes sense. You would want that for his son. There's a difference between a good death and just a death. But yeah, it was hard to read. And that was fairly early in the book too. And I think that was what set up the tone for me, as I realized, whoa, this is something different that I'm reading here. And I realized, I read Blood Meridian prior to that. Was an incredibly dark book, but it was detached from what was going on. You were really had this bird's eye view looking down, and it was historical, but this was intimate, and just that conversation, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and this is one of the benefits of audio, because we're listening to it in the car. I don't know how much time's left on the audio book, and I'm like, is it because I movie, but it'd been some years, and I also think the book's probably different. And I'm like, McCarthy, like a sick man. Like, is he gonna, man? Like, is he, because we were pretty to the point. I think we were like a couple hours into the book, and I'm not paying like to how much time has elapsed. I'm like, this might end right here, like right now. I actually believe that it could happen. And whenever you're able to suspend my belief, and I know better, and take me out, really put me in the moment of the book, that's what it's all about.
Yep, absolutely. So, I mentioned before, is I've been trying to really understand if this is purely a bleak or a beautiful story. And I think how the son tries to carry compassion, because he doesn't know anything else, right? So,
Yeah.
When you're jaded and you're going from our reality to this harsh reality versus he's just been raised in this environment, I think he still has those positive areas of human nature. And the first example of this, which kind of changed my opinion, was when they're on the road and he meets the old man Elijah.
Yeah.
And he just, he wants to feed him. He wants to help him out. The father's obviously very resistant to this plan.
That's right.
But that was the moment that I realized, okay, maybe this book isn't just dark. Maybe this isn't just bleak. There might be something more to this. That was kind of the pivotal change for me going forward, and really just, I guess, just lifted back the veil on like what McCarthy's intentions were, because only reading one book from him prior, which was Blood Marine, before I started this, and I've read several since then, is I've come to understand that he is very good at putting beauty into everything that is terrible. Like in Blood Meridian, the whole God is war concept, but leads to progress and transition and kind of everything else that's tied into it. And I was very pleased to see this moment in the story to kind of set it up for everything that I love that came later.
So, whose side are you on? Whenever Elijah's road. Wait, is Elijah the one towards the end that steals their tarp?
No, this would be the old man. They meet on the road pretty early on,
and they say he's gonna die, Papa, and he said, "Yeah, he gonna die," and you're like, "Shit," like, that sucks. Okay, I was getting them mixed up. My question is, do you think Elijah was named for a reason? Like, do you think it was significant that his name was mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's allegory for Eli.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's some prophetic aspect to it.
And that whole scene could looking like, oh, is this like a fever dream? A fever dream, Rio? Like, do they think they're seeing this person and they're not? Like, are they having hallucinations? Like, are they starving to death and that's why they're seeing this? And I agree. I felt like there was something up with that. And if I were to reread, that's the part I would want to pay most attention to now that I've accessed all the grief and all the pain, is thinking more about Eli and why they met them in the story when they did, and also the reason why he was named, which I think you're right. I think it's an allegory. Yeah.
Yep. And I could be wrong, but I think that might be the first moment where they really introduce the good guys versus bad guys topic, which, we kind of see through the second half of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, because I believe they talk about the dangers on the road. And I think this is the first, like there's something going on, like there's a reason why they're scared. And it's not just like, oh, we don't have food. It's food. It's a lot. And I do believe that this is actually where they introduce the threat.
Yep. Yeah. So we mentioned the allegory, and one thing that I noticed was when they finally get to the beach and the father goes to the boat, and there's very clearly a dove, and they make a very strong point to show that. And I kind of got that same allegory as far as like the dove and the ark and kind of saving them on this shore. I don't know if you picked that up or.
No, actually I didn't on this read through. But that makes sense to me. I mean, that tracks, I would say.
Yep. That was a great scene. Obviously, another sense of disappointment, but also beauty. The father's trying to show him something, wants to show him the ocean, kind of promises him, it might or may not be blue, and show up and it's just covered in ash.
Damn. And obviously a very on the nose point that the world has changed and it's not what it once was.
Yep.
Even the simple beauties of yesterday are now dead.
Yeah. So when he gets in the ark, obviously he has the flare that he finds. I guess I want to know, what do you think the significance of that is?
Last hope, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a last signal?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. At least my interpretation was, one, it was trying to once again provide joy. So he kind of used it like a firework, and they mentioned that in the story. And then there's also the reoccurring theme with carrying the fire, which he hands it over to his son. And then also just the sense of protection and just how happy he was to find, even though it was just a single one.
Yeah. It's also interesting. I mean, just in this scenario, right? And I think this is one of the things that people like about like post-apocalyptic types is the fact that like little things become very like even a tarp is super important. Listen, I love the show Naked and Afraid. I know it's awful, but I love how vulnerable you realize people are without simple necessities like socks. And how important their tarp is. Like the dude that steals it and steals all their stuff at the shopping cart. And it's like, if they don't get that back, the likelihood of them dying just went up 90%. I think getting more out of less in a story is always a cool way to go for me. Like I would rather have that kind of story where people have to be creative with limited resources rather than having like an absorb things, right?
No, absolutely. So I think that ties in more so when they find I guess the guy that steals everything from them on the beach, and the father chooses to strip him of all his clothes and all his belongings, basically leaving him to die in the most brutal form possible. He's going to starve. He's going to have exposure. He's done. And, obviously the son wants nothing to do with that, trying to once again show compassion for this man. But his father's just unwilling to accept it. So I felt like that was kind of the opposite of what we saw with Elijah earlier in the story. I mean, the son was overall consistent, but the father was unwilling to accept or take any more chances. But then there was a sense of retaliation overall.
Yeah. Who do you with, the boy or the papa?
I mean, I understand that they're at a place where they have to make those hard choices. So you want to sympathize for the father's intent, right? But then there is that compassion, and we feel that. So I don't think I could choose between the two. I'm not in that position, and I don't hope
I
to
kill
ever
him,
be
though.
in any form of desperation.
Bro, I'd leave him to die. I don't know if you got to strip him down. I don't know if he needs to be stripped down. I mean, that was a little much. Like, I think like the retaliation portion, but like, give me my stuff and you walk 100 paces that way and then we'll leave. You know, the boys over there just trying to be super white knighty. And I'm like, just stop it, youngin. Like, you just don't get it. This is the real world now. All right.
Yeah.
So I know I'm a monster.
You're cold blooded. You would
you
just go through everyone. Just
listen, sink or swim.
Take
bro.
them all out.
Sink or swim.
Steal everyone's shoes. No, I could see it for sure. So the beach scene is pretty significant overall. I mean, was there anything else? I mean, we're nearing the end of the story, but obviously there's other things before then. Is there anything that stands out to you as like pivotal moments?
The one thing I remember is like whenever they're away from their cart, like I knew it was gonna get stolen. Like I had a pit in my stomach, and then when they get back, it like sunk. And I think those type of moments, I mean, they happen throughout this entire book, but like he had me hook, line, and sinker the whole way. So as a reader, I would just say like, well done by him. And again, it's about a tarp and a shopping cart. Like you would think that wouldn't matter so much, but it meant everything in this story and for survival. And shoes. I mean, shoes are so important. We don't think about that, but you do in this story. So the whole beach thing leading to that being stolen is one of the things that like we're just feeling a sense of dread, knowing that their stuff's stolen.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I know some of the scenes is they introduce some new things in the film, right? So you mentioned you've seen that a couple times. One that stood out is when they end up at that house and they go in the bunker and there's just a bunch of people that have been held captive by these cannibals and everything else. What's your general impression on all these additions they put in the story? Because, you know, the book is a tight book overall.
Very tight. So I'll be honest, I remember pieces of the movie, but it's still been many years since I've watched it. But now I feel like the canon in my head's the book, like that's because it's more recent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to kind of push a little bit, right? Like if they did The Road today, it'd be a mini series, don't you think?
Whew. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely enough in the world so they could fulfill that. I mean,
like I'm talking like 4 episodes, like four 5-minute episodes, HBO limited run, what they would do now. To fill out the movie, and I think to add a little bit more of the tension, I think it's okay to add those type of things, and also like cannibals sell pretty well. Like people are tired of cannibals, so to have people locked up, yeah. And also you do need some other people in the story. There's not a large cast of characters here, so showing more faces, showing what life can be, because we think these two have it hard, but what if you were a captive of the cannibals? That's way worse. So it does give you some sense of hope for the boy and the father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the film also spent a significant amount of time, with the flashbacks with the family and the mother and everything. I felt that was important. I wish there was that in the book just to kind of bounce around, understand the context of what occurred. So I think that was a really, really smart move on there.
Yeah, I agree. Andrew Krause said in chat that Cannibal Basement was in the book, I believe. Was it? I don't think it was. I might be wrong.
Was it?
I might be wrong. It's the problem listening on audio. You forget these things. No, I think they do go into a basement, but it's dead bodies. It's not I don't believe it's people like alive or locked up. I could be wrong. I can't really remember, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I must have skipped over that if it is in the book, or it might have been pretty sparse, because that was disgusting. But it was obviously the visual from the movie. Just
yes,
so dark.
Amanda has it. It was a shipping container in the book.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Also, the stand with the cannibal that's rocking at the forest. What a how tense was that?
Yeah. Yeah, when they're in the confrontation just between the father there, where he's debating on actually killing him yet again or fleeing, and knowing that's going to be, the moment of exposure.
Yeah. So good. For such a tight book, there's a lot of really high tense moments in it. And people are saying that there were live people in Penny saying there was live people in the basement. And Kristen is saying some alive, some dead. Yeah, I do remember the dad seeing people and just being like, nah. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we should kind of backpedal a little bit, just talking about the actual end of the book. And then I think from there, it's just some of the thematic stuff that goes into the overall narrative. So it's a gut wrenching moment. Obviously, the father dies, the son is with him. I don't know how much there is to touch on that other than it's just devastating. At least it was for me. Did you expect that to happen? When you started the novel?
I actually thought the boy would die because again, I couldn't remember the ending of the movie. Like I just could not. I probably blocked it out because it was so sad. But I couldn't remember exactly how it ended. So whenever I'm reading the book, I'm thinking, does the boy die or die? I knew someone died, but I'm like, does the boy die or the dad die? But you think about it, the entire thing is about the dad keeping the boy alive. I mean, that's really what it is. And it's not just important for their relationship and for him, but it's also important for humanity because that's the next generation, possibly the last. So it's very, very important. Do you think the boy's okay?
See, I was going to ask you that is, he goes to that family, but it's really just shown more so as a man. The film, I think, really has more of that heartwarming conclusion or makes you feel like you have some resolution. But the way the book left it somewhat open ended, I want to believe it worked out. I want some type of hope for him going forward. I don't know. What did you think?
I think the boy gets killed, and it's a terrible. No, I'm just kidding.
You would you just just go for as dark as possible.
It just I'm just a realist. That's all. If it depends on what day you catch me, but can anyone be okay in that situation? Is what Amanda says, and I agree. Can anyone be okay? Like even if you do go on, I mean, what does humanity look like in the next 10 years? In a scenario like this, it's almost a shame because this book is so tight and so simple and ways that make you think and have good conversation. It almost feels like there's so much more potential to in this sphere, doesn't it? Like, and I know that there's a post-apocalyptic world for every day of the year for how many people write it, but this is definitely like this and The Stand are the two I think of when I think apocalyptic works that like are above the rest. And it's almost a shame that Cormac McCarthy hasn't written more in this scenario. I won't call it a scenario, not world, because he did it so well. But I think the boy's okay. I think the whole purpose of the dad's life and to carry the fire and to live through his wife's suicide and to do all these things was to find a better place for his son. Maybe not for him, but for his son.
Interesting. So if he wrote more in this world, would you want to see a continuation of the boy's story or maybe just another group trying to survive within this environment?
Anything.
You don't care.
I would love to see a cannibal who's having a moral like I would be in on that. That sounds I just love the atmosphere of this book, dude. I love it all the way to the ending. And when they're talking about carrying the fire on and burning, like it actually felt like it was lighting up the scene to me, even though there was no literal fire at the moment, that there's just like glimmers of hope. And I think it's like an amazingly bleak and wonderful story that still has some sort of positive outcome, even if it's not like the most positive thing in the world. Like this is how you should write bleakness. Like I feel like this is a masterclass on balancing those two things.
Yeah. I mean, this is the best post-apocalyptic thing I've read so far. I know we're reading Swan Song later in the year, so it's still, might be dethroned, but I'm not hopeful that that's going to happen. Yeah. So this book, I mean, it was just such a surprise for me overall, which I kind of mentioned before, is just how well he was able to portray some of these emotions, these key moments in such it's really a short book. There's very few words in this, and just how effective it was. It just blew me away.
And it says a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've read some good stuff this year, but I read this early in the year and I immediately thought like, oh, this is going to be my book of the year. I just could not get enough of it. And I know you were pretty high on it too, and really pushed both of us reading more McCarthy, I think, since then.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite non-fantasy science fiction book of all time. The hard part is then I read No Country for Old Men, and I think it's just as good in a different way, though, in a much different way. But I think The Road has more significance, and I really would love to. I would love to read The Road every 5 years because as I get older, maybe I'll have kids. Maybe I'll have kids. Doesn't really matter. My text will change multiple times because it is so matter of fact and it's so just there. Right? Like I said, between the audiobook narration and then just reading it on page, totally different experience. So this is a book that could read me in a lot of, and it's one that I would love to revisit. Do you get the feel like maybe this is weird, and I don't have kids, but if I were to have a little Jimmy Nuts running around or Jimethea Nuts running around, I would think this would be a book that I'd want them to read. Is that messed up?
I mean, at a point, sure. But I will say that having children, I mean, I haven't read it prior, but really made this super impactful.
Yeah.
So much so that, and really that sacrifice from father and son, I made my dad read this. I didn't give him an option. He does audiobooks. I just bought it and sent it to him. Because I think he obviously, we haven't gone through this, but just kind of, he's, later in life, and he's done a ton of sacrifice for me and raising me and my sister and everything. And I was hoping that he would find those kind of beautiful moments and kind of tie that into our relationship. And I think it did, because he read this. I've recommended a lot of books to him, and he usually doesn't give me feedback. He read Stormlight Archive and didn't even tell me for months. He's the worst at that. But this one, he immediately just called me and was just like, wow, like this was beautiful, but it was so depressing. And this was something kind of messed him up for a couple days.
Yeah.
But I think as a parent, or even pushing this to your parents, is well worth it. Now, giving it to a child, like you just mentioned,
Oh, well, so
I don't know if that's the move.
So when I say child, I mean like 18 is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
like they graduate high school and you go, here's the real world, and you just hand them that,
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
I grew up watching Freddy Krueger movies and stuff at 5 years old. I've never seen The Lion King, Baron. I've never seen The Lion King. I saw Tommyknockers TV adaptation before I saw any Disney films in my life. So,
okay, it's all making sense now.
I'm cut from a different cloth. That cloth happens to be very bloody, but nevertheless.
Okay. So, yeah. So this is a book you said you want to read more frequently.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, this is a dark experience. You need to put yourself through that.
So here's the thing, and this is why Grimdark books is for me. It reminds you what it is to live and to face those really tough things. We have an infatuation with situations happening, and that's why true crime is so popular. Because it reminds you what it is to be human. Because when you get numb to those things, there's like a distance between you and your fellow person. And I think going into the dark depths of what it, at the end of the day, what happens being human and dying, I just think it's important. I think it's important. And to me, and this is just me, it reminds me to have some joy while I am in a feel-good spot. And I'm fortunate, right? Because there's going to be dark days. There's going to be dark days where we're all going to get that phone call that changes our lives one way or another. It's going to happen. And these books are reminders to enjoy the good times. Also feel a connection with fellow humans.
Yeah. Now I could see that. You mentioned grimdark, which nobody can give a straight answer on what the definition is. Do you consider this grimdark?
Sure, why not? Who cares? Sure, why not? Lord of the Rings is grimdark. Whatever.
Yeah, might as well.
I mean, it depends on catch me, but like I overall think that entire term is just like silly. Like I think it's very silly. I think art is art. Like it is what it is, and it makes them like you said. I remember you talking about this book, and you said that you felt like there were some positive outcomes in this book. Like there were some positive vibes coming through this of like perseverance in these things. I think a lot of other people would say that this is one of the most depressing books of all time, and they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And for me, it depends on the day, right? But that's art. That's the experience. And I think whenever we get wording it into a bucket, just limits things. It limits things. Kind of, when we put people in buckets, I think their potential.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was my overall takeaway from the book is I wouldn't necessarily say hope, but just kind of that beauty, that
altruism,
that altruism, and like that love and compassion can kind of, there's no amount of desperation that can take that away, especially through the bond of a father and son. And I think he had to go to extreme lengths in this story to illustrate that point.
Yeah, and was the father sacrifice worth it if his son gets to pop one more Coca-Cola?
Yeah,
probably.
I would say so. I mean, as a parent and knowing the lengths that you will go, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that makes the daddy. But I think it does not agree with that and thinks he's a coward. Isn't that interesting? Like, is the bravery within accepting the fate and facing it head on, or is bravery going through it? Like there's a case for both, in my opinion.
He's far from a coward.
Yeah,
far, in my opinion.
I would agree with that. With that.
Okay, so I mean, that was my intake away from it. I asked earlier, is this just a bleak novel, or is there beauty here? And I kind of expressed my opinion, but what is your final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think so, because we don't know what happens to the boy, but we know that there's a chance. And whether there's a chance, there's hope. And where there's hope, there's some happiness, I think. So how small of a sliver it might be.
So you've read some other McCarthy since then. No Country. I know you said you just finished Child of God, which I have actually yet to read, and you got me a little bit freaked out on picking it up. But I will. But I certainly will. So how does this book compare to the other McCarthy that you've read?
So, like I said, I think No Country for does things like there's some of the tension, the dialogue is also great in The Road, but the dialogue in No Country for Old Men is so good. Like, it's so good. So those two to me are like pretty much tied. I think The Road for emotion gets a little bit of the nod, because if a book can make me feel, it generally is going to be higher than books that are just great. And Child of God is something else. I don't know if I enjoyed Child of God, and I don't mean because it was poorly done. I just mean because of what it is. It is a character study. It very real look. There's a sense of injustice with it all. Just a very not feel good book at all. Without silver linings here, there's none in Child of God. There's no. You'll see. It takes a lot of gall to write a book like that, and to end it the way he did.
Yeah, I've yet to read it. I know you said that it's a book you would never recommend to anyone because they would think you're a psychopath.
No, I'm good. No, like The Road is one I do recommend for people, because I think that it has a lot of really just like raw emotion in it that I think is healthy in a way. Whereas Child of God is absolutely not that, like, at all. I think it's really well written. I really enjoyed Child of God as far as that goes and what he did, but like I would never want to read that book again.
Okay, well, I'll let you know what I think when I pick it up.
Oh man, it's rough. No Country for Old Men, though. No, have you read that one? Right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Some of the tension in those scenes that go back and forth. Everything's hanging, in the ether of this conversation and what's about that. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
So you'd recommend The Road. So who is this book for overall? Is this something that everybody should read? Is this an important novel, or is this just for a niche kind of fan?
Yeah, you know what? I'm feeling pretentious today. So yeah, I'm gonna say it's a necessary read, and I do think it's a masterpiece. Like, I really feel that way. There are a few books that can connect people over a lot of space. because humans disagree about all types of things and ideologies and all these things. But this is a book I think that can bring people together, even though it's within grief. I think it's still an important connection. So yeah, I think it's really important.
Okay. I haven't read anything else like this book. Is there anything you can compare it to, or does this really stand on its own?
So in terms, I think it's kind of unmatchable in a way, because you couldn't redo this, right? You would just say, oh, that's the road. You know what I mean? Like it would just be, oh, the guy read the road. Cool. But the Stand had vibes that match this book, for, in my opinion. I think that's the closest I can think. And they're both post-apocalyptic. So, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was the main list I had here. Is there anything else you want to bring up, Jimmy? Anything worth mentioning?
No, I don't think so. You've read Blood Meridian, and I know there's a lot of people out there, like our friend Scott, who did not like Blood Meridian, and he read The Road and liked it much more, but he still said that he doesn't think Cormac's style is ever going to fit him, and that's totally acceptable because it's very biased. But how does this compare writing wise to Blood Meridian? Like what am I into?
Well, Blood Meridian, like I've mentioned before, is really kind of this bird's eye view of what's going on.
Mhm.
There's a lot of horror, I guess horrific acts, but it doesn't feel intimate. The writing of the prose is significantly more dense in Blood Meridian than The Road. And obviously, it's just a longer story. I think The Road is much more accessible. Now, reading a good handful of McCarthy books, this is probably the story I would recommend as far as starting. Maybe No Country, because it's not quite as devastating overall, but I think the writing is really accessible on The Road. Like you compared it almost to Stephen King before, and this is much more literary overall than Stephen King, but I think maybe a fan of King or McCammon or something else would feel somewhat at home in this story. Blood Meridian, I cannot say that. It actually, as much as I liked it, the longer more time I was away from Blood Meridian, the more I enjoyed it. But when I first read it, I was just confused. I was frustrated. This was just completely different than anything I've ever read before. And I really need to reread it now that I'm a little more familiar with his writing style overall. But it had me push off The Road for a long time because I was didn't want to get back into it. I bought the hardcover for The Road and was like, I'm going to read that. And I didn't. And then like months later, I bought the ebook. I was like, I'm going to read that. And I just didn't. I kept pushing it off because I was so worried to relive that experience I had with Blood Meridian. And eventually I did it on audio. So I have every format for the book because I kept procrastinating on reading it. So I personally think you're going to enjoy Blood Meridian, just kind of knowing your taste overall. And obviously quite a different story, but almost like Malazan, to where you have that kind of zoomed out perspective.
I love that.
Yeah, it's the perspective is very similar.
Now I have a version, and I appreciate all the information about Blood Meridian. I'm still terrified to read it. What special editions exist for The Road, and what one should I buy, Baron? Because I know your fingers are on the pulse. I know it. So you got to let me know what do we got here? Because I got like the Barnes and Noble literary paperback, which is fine. Actually, they're nice in the hand. But I want a special edition. I want to spend some money. What are we doing?
I mean, there's beautiful ones out there, but the only one that anyone can afford is the folio one. It's like $60. But if there's the nicest one I've seen is the Suntup, which
the Suntup,
Suntup, of The Road.
The Road. Okay, I'm looking this up.
You might see a comma in that one.
Suntup, The Road, limited edition.
But go for it. I'd love to see it on your shelf.
Oh my goodness, this is beautiful. Well, I'm buying that. That's gorgeous. I always know I can count on you. Like if I want a nice of a book, I just say, Baron, what do I go? Like, what are my options? And you always have me hooked up, man. You're always getting me in trouble.
All right. Well, I think that's all I had. Anything from you, Jamie, before we wrap this up here?
No, man, I really appreciate you bringing me on, and I would love to chat about other McCarthy books with you. And we know he has 2 more coming out this year. This is kind of a surprise. So if we want to do something with those or do a read along, I'd be down. It'd be cool.
Yep, absolutely. So, Jimmy, thank you so much for jumping on here with me. I know we had some scheduling issues originally, so appreciate your patience, but happy we got to do this.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure.
All right. Anyone that's viewing in chat, thank you so much. Until next time, we'll see you.